Pope Francis changed my life pretty dramatically. On October 1st, 2013, I got a call from the papal nuncio telling me that I had been chosen to be the auxiliary bishop of St. Paul in Minneapolis by Pope Francis. Then just 8 years later, almost to the day, October 4th, 2021, I got another call from the papal nuncio, a different papal nuncio, but the same Pope Francis, who said that I had been chosen to be the Bishop of Crookston. And so Pope Francis, in both those occasions, radically changed my life. My life looks very different today from what it did then. I'll never forget the first time I met Pope Francis in person. I had been ordained a bishop December 9th in 2013, and I was already scheduled to go to Rome with the seminarians from the seminary in St. Paul. And so I knew I was going to be in Rome, and I knew it was possible to meet the Pope if you were in Rome, so I called up one of my bishop friends, and I said, how do you get to meet the Pope when you're in Rome? He said, it's really easy. You just put on your bishop's cassock and you go to the Wednesday audience. And they'll let you in, and then they sit you up front, and then afterwards you get to meet the Pope. I said, do I need a reservation or like a letter that says I'm a real bishop or something like that? He said, nope, just put on your bishop's cassock and show up. And sure enough, he's right. You put on a bishop's cassock, you walk up, the Swiss Guard, they just salute you, they let you walk right by. Nobody ever asks you for identification or anything. And you can walk right up to the center of the St. Peter's Square, and then you're given a seat there with the other bishops. And then at the end of the audience, they invite all those bishops present that day to go forward and meet Pope Francis. Now, when you meet the Pope as a bishop, there's a protocol. You're supposed to remove your zucchetto and then kiss his ring. But I forgot all that because I was practicing what I wanted to say in Spanish to him. And so I said to him, Holy Father, I just grabbed his hand and I said, Holy Father, thank you you named me a bishop, I said just a few months ago. Thank you for being a man of the gospel. And he looked at me and he said, oh my, you're young. He said, oh my, you're young. And then he said, you're going to have to work a lot. And then he put his finger in my chest and he pounded on my chest and he said, and you have to pray a lot too. And as he said 3 times as he pounded on my chest, pray a lot, pray a lot, pray a lot. I got that message, and I've tried to be faithful to that command from our Holy Father. I think it's fitting that on this day, when we're remembering our Holy Father, as you might have heard this morning in Rome, his body, which had been laid in state there in the chapel of his home at the Casa Santa Marta, they processed with his body today out into St. Peter's Square and then up into St. Peter's Basilica, and they had a prayer service there. And his body will lie in state there until Friday evening, when they'll prepare his body for the funeral by closing the casket. It's fitting that on this day, though, that we have the Gospel of Luke chapter 24 in the road to Emmaus. Pope Francis loved this passage, and he referred to it often. And many people even think of it as kind of a key to his own papacy and really kind of a hallmark of his life. In this way, what happens in the Gospel on the road to Emmaus? You have 2 disciples who have given up. They've given up on Jesus. They're discouraged. They think Jesus is dead. And they're going home. They're on their way late in the evening at the end of the day, and they're going away from Jesus. And what happens? Jesus goes after them. Jesus himself goes and he finds those 2, and he walks with them, and he enters into their conversation, and then he tries to show them who he is and how they shouldn't be discouraged and why he had to suffer. And then he leads them to an encounter with himself in the Eucharist. Of course, we know the first Mass was at the Last Supper. That's the first time that the Lord turned the bread and wine into his own body and blood. But when was the second one? Well, it was that first Easter Sunday at Emmaus. St. Luke uses the exact same words to describe the Last Supper as he does Emmaus. He says, he took the bread, said the blessing, broke it, and gave it to them. And I'll say those same words here. The resurrected Jesus becomes present in their midst, right? And Pope Francis really saw this as a kind of a command for us as the church. We're living in a time when many people are leaving the church. They're disaffiliating from the church. They're experiencing discouragement, despair, and they're walking away. And what are we supposed to do? Well, we're supposed to be like Jesus. We're supposed to go and find them and walk with them. And walk with them towards an encounter with Jesus. These two words actually became really important for Pope Francis. He spoke about both of them in his very first apostolic exhortation on evangelization, Evangelii Gaudium. And the words were accompaniment and encounter. What's accompaniment? Well, it means that I have to meet people where they are. I have to enter into their place, whatever that is, a place of discouragement, a place of sadness, a place of walking away from God. And I have to go and be with them and listen to them and then try to share Jesus with them. And then try to lead them, accompany them towards an encounter with Jesus. We can't change anybody's life. But if people have an encounter with Jesus, it can change them. And we can gradually invite people to do that. But you all know, accompaniment is hard work, right? It's not the sort of thing that happens in a day often. It happens over time as I'm walking and befriending people and listening to them and gradually trying to share with them when they know that I care for them, and then gradually trying to lead them to an encounter. Of course, an encounter, and Pope Francis spoke about this often, an encounter is to come to know actually Jesus as God, the real living person of Jesus as God. Pope Francis had his own very profound encounter when he was 17, right before his 17th birthday actually. And he was on his way, it was a day off school, it was a holiday, and he was on his way with his friends. And I think he was actually going to meet his girlfriend. And he was walking by his parish church. And he said as he walked by his parish church, he felt this irresistible urge to go in the church. It was so strong that he said to his friends, go ahead, I'll catch up with you. And then when he went into the church, he saw a priest whom he didn't know, which was strange because it was his parish church, right? He saw a priest whom he didn't know going into the confessional. And he felt this irresistible urge to go to confession. And so he did. He went in and he went to confession. It's about 10 days before his 17th birthday. And of course, he never said what he said in that confession. He doesn't have to, right? It's part of the beauty of confession. But what he did say is this. He said, in that confession, I felt welcomed by the mercy of God. And he said when he stood up from that confession, he knew God was real, and he knew he was called to be a priest. And it affected him so dramatically that he never went and met his friends. He actually went home and spent the rest of the day praying. He had an encounter, the sacrament of confession with God. And it changed his life. And think how different the world is today because of that encounter Pope Francis had with God. Really, I think if you want to understand Pope Francis and everything that he did, and sometimes people found him difficult to understand, even me sometimes, but if you want to understand Pope Francis, I think you have to understand it in terms of this key of evangelization. I had the privilege of an ad limina visit with Pope Francis. I got to meet Pope Francis 6 times. But the most impactful time was when we did our ad limina visit, which is all the bishops of the world go every 7 or 8 years to visit the Pope. And I spent 2.5 hours with Pope Francis. So there were 14 of us bishops from Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota. And we were in a small room, and we sat around, and he sat in the center, and he just said, what do you want to talk about? And we got to ask him anything we want for 2.5 hours, right? And it was a really beautiful experience to get to kind of meet him, to see the real person. But in that time, I brought up how impacted I had been by his first exhortation on the joy of the gospel, Evangelii Gaudium. And he said to me this, he said, that's the most important thing I've written. And he said, it's the key to understanding everything else I've written. He said, it's not the most popular. He said, the people like Laudato Si better, but I like Evangelii Gaudium. And his point was this, that he wanted everything he did to be seen in light of evangelization. Everything that he did, even this worldwide synod process, people often lost track of this, but for Pope Francis, it was about evangelization. It was about how do we learn to evangelize the world better. And so I think if we're going to be faithful to Pope Francis's mission, it's really the same mission that was given us by Benedict XVI and John Paul II. It's a mission for evangelization. And I remember one particular talk that he gave. It was to the priests of the Diocese of Rome. And you know, Pope Francis was from Argentina. He could be kind of strong sometimes. You know, he would say strong things. He kind of had a feisty side. And he said to them, he said, you know, we have that parable of the lost sheep. And Jesus says he left the 99 to go after the one, right, that went astray. He said, the problem we have is we got the one sheep in the church and the 99 are out there, and we're spending all of our time combing the hair of this one sheep to make sure it looks really good. He said it's completely wrong, right? If anything, he would want us to be people who are going out to bring the good news of the gospel. This is what I think got him elected as Pope, and it's really the fire that drove him in his papacy. Was he wanted a church that would go out to find those who are lost. And that means you and me have that responsibility. The last time I got to meet Pope Francis was in June of 2023, and we were on pilgrimage with the organizers for the National Eucharistic Congress, and we went to Rome to have the Pope bless our monstrance. If you saw pictures of the monstrance, it was about this tall off the floor. It was a huge monstrance, and we brought it before the Holy Father. He said, "Oh, grande." We were really worried because he'd been in the hospital the week before, and he just got out of the hospital the day before, and yet he met us the next day. And he came walking in, he was full of energy, and he spoke powerfully about the Eucharist that day, and powerfully about how the Eucharist calls us to evangelize. Here's what he said. I was in the room when he said these words. In the Eucharist, we encounter the one who gave everything for us, who sacrificed himself in order to give us life, who loved us to the end. We become credible witnesses to the joy and transforming beauty of the gospel only when we recognize that the love we celebrate in this sacrament cannot be kept to ourselves, but demands to be shared by all. This is the sense of a missionary spirit. You go to the celebration of Mass, you receive communion, you adore the Lord, and then what do you do after that? You go out and you evangelize. This is what Jesus asks of us. You go to Mass, you receive communion, you adore the Lord, and what do you do after? You go out and evangelize. Jesus asks this of us. In fact, this is what happens if we have a true encounter with the Lord. We want to share it, right? And this is what happened at Emmaus. When they encountered the Lord, they ran back to Jerusalem. So let's try to be faithful to that command of our Holy Father, that we might become the joy-filled evangelizers he asks us to be.